7 principles of prosperity. And in your bulletin, it says, prosperity is natural. It's your birthright. What a powerful statement. Prosperity is natural. But isn't it something that you have to work and strive and sweat over? Is it really my birthright? That means by right of having been born into this human form on this planet, I have a right to experience prosperity? Prosperity, by the way, means to thrive, to flourish, and to succeed in your undertakings. And the answer to that question is yes. And one of the problems a lot of people have is they don't believe it. And so they continue to struggle and find all kinds of reasons to deny that. So that's the idea. Prosperity is natural. It is your birthright. Now let's take this, so let's take the whole thing and transform that into an affirmation. Prosperity is my natural state. It is my birthright. I am hardwired to prosper. My creative ideas and desires are natural inspirations designed to bless me and bless my world. Can you imagine if you were to take that idea, roll it around, think about it, and repeat it to yourself often? After a while, in that kind of inquiry, in that kind of inner examination, you begin to embody the truth or the falsehood in it. And usually what comes out of it is a whole new way of looking at things. The second one is the source of all supply is spirit. You know, all there is God. Everything issued out of this thing that we call God, the one infinite something. And we can't really explain because we live in a concept of time and space. And if we go back as far as we can, we're always going to ask this question, well, where did God come from? Well, it's an invalid question. So let's not drive ourselves crazy trying to ask the question. By the way, you can experience the reality of God as ever present, but it's not something you can describe in the language that we understand right now. But the idea that God is all there is a very, very old one. And when we can conceptualize that, when we can embody the idea that there is one source to all things, and I am part of that, then I begin to realize that I am source also as an expression of that one source. We go to the third point. Cash follows creativity. Well, there's cash. We don't like that word in church, do we? We're not supposed to talk about money in church. Well, I'm talking about it, and next week we're going to talk about your beliefs about money, and the following week after that we're going to talk about principles dealing about money. And the reason for that is I want to kind of break through some of the concepts that people have where immediately somebody starts talking to you about money and you have all kinds of justifications and reasons why you're not as affluent as you really down deep want to be. And so in coming up with your justifications, you essentially create blockages to experience it. Well, I'm tippy-toeing into it by using the term cash. Cash follows creativity, not cravings. You see, there's a craving within us. There's an urge within us to express, to experience, to acquire, to have all kinds of things that are going to help us to do our life more effectively, more efficiently. We don't go for this stuff just to have more stuff, but some people do. Some people have problems with that. But we really want to be able to embody in our lives the principles that puts us into alignment with the overall flow of things. So cash does not follow the cravings, because the more we crave, the more, in a sense, we are acknowledging that we don't have, I need, I want, I've got to go get. And what is that but a negative affirmation that is apt to create even more blockages to it? Instead, we stand back, we look at things and we say, wait a minute. I am a creative individualization of the infinite. God placed something within me that needs to be expressed. I am a creative individual. So my task is to discover, to develop, and express that creativity. And you see, in that process, what happens is you open yourself to the flow that's going to give rise to the expression of your talents, of your gifts and any other thing that's going to help you to fulfill your creativity is a function of your being open to it. I'm not putting this the way I want to. Cash follows creativity. In other words, the goodness of life is going to flow to the center of your creative endeavor, not to the center of your great needs or your cravings. The fourth one of these points is that money, there's that nasty word again, money must circulate so it can serve its purpose in this world. I love, what was his name? Oh dear, you just flipped out right out of my mind. The guy who wrote the book, God is Money in Action. Any of you remember him? The little booklet years and years ago, he was Charles Barker. Raymond Charles Barker, that's it. God is Money in Action. And see, he's touching on this idea that money is something to get into circulation. It's like the flow of goodness. If we turn off the valve or put a dam in the flow of any resource that might be coming our way, what we're doing is cutting ourselves off from the experience of it. And that's exactly what some people do. And it arises as a result of fear in their lives. They don't really believe in the loving, benevolent, giving, wonderful God that they say they do. You know, they come to church and they say all these wonderful things and they agree with everybody else and they hallelujah and praise the Lord all over the place, and then they go home and they carry the same worries with them. I'm not saying that these aren't real concerns, and we certainly must be concerned, and we must be responsible for the goods and services that our life represent. But if we're always thinking of them in terms of limitation, what we're doing is we're cutting off the flow. We are moving outside of this realm of circulation. Uncontrolled or unconditioned acceptance. One thing that will keep you from experiencing the abundance of life almost more than anything is not having the willingness to accept it as there. And again, a lot of the reason for this is that people will often create all kinds of reasons for them not having in their life what they really want, but they don't want to admit it because somehow or another there's a certain amount of shame to it. And the shame may come in all forms. It may be shame over wanting money because money is a bad thing to begin with, or just a shame, well, they don't have it and their friends down the street do, and so they come up with all kinds of justifications for not having it. That's not making themselves acceptable to it. So there's got to be an unconditional acceptance of the good that's there. And we'll come a little bit more to this later when I get to the 3 points that I'm talking about here. Did I already tell you about the 3 points? No. Oh, well, you're not supposed to be looking at that. Anyway. The next thing is, and we'll talk about it, you gotta love the material world. Gotta love the material world. You're saying, I've gotta love money? Money, the love of money is the root of all evil, isn't it? Don't the Gospels say that? And isn't that pounded into us? The love of money is the root of all evil. You cannot love it, but give to me. You know, this is what you hear in some places. And I'm not here to demean any other discipline. But sometimes they being those counterparts to me in the less enlightened traditions. Isn't that an arrogant statement? Have you ever heard it? Well, yeah, it is. But allow me a little bit of arrogance. It's metaphysical arrogance. You see, good. Money, it's the love of money to the exclusion of other things that is the evil, because that gives your focus all to one thing and you begin to make that your source. You see? And when you've done that, you've cut yourself off from the experience of whatever the resource might be. So think of it this way. God is love. We're made in the image and likeness of God. So we are made in the image of love. Love is our nature. certainly an aspect of our nature. We are admonished in all great enlightenment traditions to love God. You know, love your neighbor, love yourself, love God. Now, God is all there is. Everything came out of God. So if God is the all in all, where does that put money? Somewhere else? It cannot be anywhere else. So are you to not love the aspect of God that we call money? No, we are to love money, but love it for what it is, as a facility or a vehicle that comes into our life that serves us in being able to express who we are and make the contribution that we are here to make. So that's not focusing on it as an end, it's seeing it as a means, as an opportunity for you. The last one here, consciousness. Consciousness creates. Now this is heavy, this is deep, and I'm not going to go into a lot of discussion about consciousness. We have a person here in our congregation who recently wrote a wonderful little book on consciousness. That's Jack Guskin in the back. And that amazes me. Have I ever told you how much I appreciate that? Yeah, I have. When you first gave it to me months ago, but I haven't since then. Well, I really appreciate it. It's one of the most complete, or one of the best things I've come across on consciousness. But if you want to really examine the idea of consciousness, go type into Google consciousness, click on that, and you will get pages and pages and pages and pages examining every aspect of consciousness. That's not what we're talking about here so much. What Margaret Shepard is referring to here with this simple comment that consciousness creates is that all of our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs, the conscious and subconscious interactions that we have with life, all of this come together to create our experience of life. So when we can bring alignment or congruence to the different ideas, what we think, what we feel, how we believe, what we say, what we do, we can bring all this together in agreement, then what we're doing is creating an awareness that we can embody. And when we embody that, those are the 7 principles. That's all right. Leave it be. I drop things all the time. Half the times I don't know what it is. Those are the 7 principles. But there are 3 basic points that I want to make. And they're up here behind me that I'm going to discuss, which is the guts of what I'm doing here today. And believe me, it's going to be relatively short. But before going into those 3 points, which are these: you're enough just the way you are right now. Remember that song, I love myself the way I am. There's nothing I need to change. It's a wonderful song, and we ought to sing that sometime. Again, we've done it here before. You're enough just the way you are. The second point is there's enough to go around among everybody, and even more than enough. And these are hard things for people to accept, much less believe. They might accept them for somebody else, but certainly not for themselves, because they know what their life is really like. It sucks, doesn't it? And the third point is that it is your duty, it is your solemn obligation and life task to express and experience all the goodness that there is. That is the abundance, the prosperity, the flow. Well, these are kind of tough things, especially when we consider this business of duty and obligation, because we don't like that so much. But I'm going to talk about that. Before going into it, I want to give you a couple of other principles that I think are important, that help provide the context within which I can spend the next 10 minutes wrapping this up. Here's a comment from Meister Eckhart, the great 13th century Catholic Dominican priest who just turned the world on its ear. And I've preached on Eckhart himself. I'm not going to do that again here today. But he's a wonderful guy, and he's one of my favorite philosophers. He makes this comment. Now listen to this carefully. When the soul wishes to experience something, it throws an image of the experience before it and enters into its own image. That doesn't make sense. It's kind of like breaking the rules, the physical rules of the universe on time and space, isn't it? when that soul, when that deep down urge, that something, that intuitive something within you wants to experience something, you project an image of that something and then step into it. See, what we're being told here is that no separation between the observer and the observed. And this is a tough thing to accept. I came across another one recently in a wonderful book that I'm reading called Biocentrism, and it's a modern day science. He's written some remarkable stuff. And he's a Nobel Prize type personality, been around a long time. Biocentrism by Robert Lanza. You know, like Mario Lanza, no relationship, but Robert Lanza. And he's more into biological things. But in this book, he quotes Bishop George Berkeley, the 17th century Irish Anglican priest, as having said this: the only things we perceive are our perception. The only things we perceive are our perceptions. It's very much like that other statement. And it's because our limitation in being able to consider something like this lies in the realm of time and space. And I'm not going to be discussing this a great deal now, except to say that reality seems to lie outside of this realm of dimension as we know it. And this reminds me, I have a friend, he's my prayer partner, and we meet about once a week. And sometimes if I'm out of town or he's out of town, we don't, or something interferes. But for the last 5 or 6 years, we've been meeting. And we talk together, and we chat, and we comment on the food and all, but we always get around to praying. And as part of that process, we always get into some discussion. And we were discussing some of these very ideas about the reality of things fairly recently. He says, you know, Richard, I'm looking at this whole process of life, and I finally come to the conclusion, it's a dream. It's really a dream. Now, that could be interpreted in a lot of different ways. And my conclusion about this is the dream is dreaming the dream. Same kind of thing. What we're talking about is an inseparability between the object and that which is observing and the observer, if you want to look at that. And of course, you know, we can go into Schrodinger's cat and all of the other kinds of things in modern science that tend to deal with the same sorts of things. And you say, but that's pure, unadulterated nonsense. Sure it is, except we're beginning to validate the truth of a different kind of reality than we've ever thought before. So you see, what this is saying to me is that I need to shift the way I look at things. Again, these 3 simple practical principles that we have up here, as we begin to embody those ideas or use them in such a way that we can apply them in our lives, what we're really, I think, in great need of is to begin to understand that there is a transcendence of the reality that we have identified with all our lives, so that we can start entertaining the possibility of another way of looking at things. So let's look at these 3 practical, get out of the highfalutin philosophical stuff and look at these 3 practical points. The first one, you are enough just as you are. And all I want to say to that is, I believe it. And I've not always wanted to believe it, because I can look at all my limitations and all my lack and clumsiness and whatever. But I love this that Dr. Ernest Holmes says. It comes right out of the textbook. It's on page 36. He says, the original life, that is God, is infinite. It is good, it is filled with peace, it is of the essence of purity, it is the ultimate of intelligence, it is power, it is law, it is life, it is in us. In that inner sanctuary of our own nature, hidden perhaps from objective gaze, nestles the seed of perfection. Don't you love the way he puts things? And then he goes on and he says this: in our ignorance of this truth, that there is the seed of perfection within us. And it's all of those things that the whole of life is in us. It says, in our ignorance of this truth, we have misused the highest power we possess. And so great is this power, so complete is our freedom in it, so absolute the domain of law through it, that the misuse of this power has brought upon us the very conditions from which we suffer. We are bound because we are first free. And what he's telling us in a very powerful way is we are at choice. And we've got to push the boundaries of our perception of the way life really is. We've got to start stretching ourselves and entertaining other possibilities, and we'll find that we come to the realization that I am enough just as I am. Let's say that. I am enough just as I am. I am enough just as I am. Do you feel a sense of empowerment as you begin to do that? Stand up in front of the mirror and do that every day. 233 times. That's the magical number. I got it from my mystic master. It was channeled. Oh, yours is wrong. Yours is wrong. 2, 3, 3. See, 2, 3, 3 adds up to an 8, which is a working number. 2, 3, 4 adds up to a 9, which is finally complete. Now, we can argue that. I know. Let's not. Let's look at the second point here. The second one of these very practical principles, if you will. There's enough to go around and more. And again, I'm not going to discuss this in great detail, but I do want to say, or use as an example, Buckminster Fuller. You know, Buckminster Fuller, the great American mystic, architect, engineer, scientist, a little bit of everything, brought together a group of his students, his graduate students at one point, for a special project. And this project was to inventory the resources of the earth. Can you imagine? There's no way you can inventory the resources of the earth because there's always more, and we're always discovering more. But this is way back. And if you want to read about this experiment a little bit more, go to his book. I think it was the last book he wrote before he died, called Critical Point, The Critical Point, or something like that. Anyway, what they came up with after they got together all the data that represented all of the resources that they could account for, not all of the resources, but all they could account for, was that the dollar equivalent of all of those resources represented $1 billion per person on the face of the earth. Can you imagine? Everybody is potentially a billionaire. And you look at that and say, wow, but where's mine? That's a good question, because I was just reading the other day about food in the world and the distribution of food and all of that, and how many people are dying of hunger all the time. And yet, by a very critical analysis, it's been determined over and over through the years that our food production in the world, and probably in the United States almost alone, I don't know, there are big countries like India and China, so they have a role in doing differently, is enough to more than supply on an ongoing basis the food that everyone could possibly need. And you look at this and you say, well, why do we have such a shortage? Why do we have the problems that we have? Why can't we get it out there to them? Why all the hunger and the lack and the suffering? Well, some people say, well, it's politics. Other people will say, well, it's big business standing in the way. They're not going to make as much profit. Other people say all kinds of things. None of that matters. What it really, well, it does matter, of course, but what it really boils down to is it's ignorance. It is ignorance that grows, no, it leads to fear, which leads to more ignorance. It's kind of like a cycle, isn't it? And the fear is that there is not enough. You know, the delusion of not enoughness. And so we do all kinds of things to try to accommodate to there not being enough. And in doing that, we box ourselves in and we shut ourselves down from the flow of all of the goodness that is around us. And I know some of us, as I would say, well, can't we do something to help some of these people? Yes, we can. You can do exactly what you're doing. Become the best examples of living life fully that you can possibly be. Have you ever heard of a man named Frederick J. Eichrenkotter II? Nobody's ever heard of Frederick J. Eichrenkotter II? Have you ever heard of Reverend Ike? Everybody, not everybody, a lot of people have heard of Reverend Ike. Great metaphysical teacher with an evangelical tendency toward him. Did some marvelous things. He died about 1.5 years ago. And I looked him up last night because I thought, I'm going to mention him and wonder what happened to him. Well, he died. And it happens, you know. You may be surprised at that, but it does happen. He made a comment one time that I like very much that's relevant here. He said, the best thing that best possible thing you can do for the poor is to not be one of them. Isn't that neat? And you say, but that sounds so selfish. No, if you don't like it, well, then go be one of the poor and go live with them. But think of what you can do by not being one of them. Think of the influence that you can have. First of all, the resources. If you were wealthy, the resources that you can bring to bear to actually do something in a very practical way, working in some of these communities. Or better yet, think of the example that you become as a result of not flaunting your wealth, but being an example of what other people's possibilities are in this life. And this brings me to the final point here. What are we to do with our life? How is this really important? And that is point number 3. It is your duty, it is your solemn obligation and life task to experience all that you possibly can experience in this life. Now, some people look at this and they don't particularly like that idea. First of all, they don't like the word duty. Duty is a dirty 4-letter word. You know, just like that other dirty 4-letter word, work. Duty, if you look it up in the dictionary, is very simple. A simple definition of it is, duty is a task that you are required to perform. Are there any tasks that you are required to perform? Fundamental, basic tasks that will never change for you. Yes, the greatest task that you have to undertake, and you may as well realize this now. If you don't, most of you probably do, is to discover, to develop, and to express who you really are. To discover, develop, and express the divinity of you, which is to acknowledge and recognize that you live within this field of unlimitlessness. That's your duty. And the obligation, which is an obligation that's very close to the idea of duty, with a slightly different connotation. The dictionary says that it is a condition of being morally bound to do something. Sounds pretty much the same. I don't know about the moral part because morals are really relative. But it is the condition of being bound to do something. And we're talking about the same thing. So I ask you, what is your duty? What is your obligation as a human being experiencing the human life, a spiritual being experiencing the human life? Or I heard it put a little differently lately. It says, why do we keep hedging our beds? Why don't we just say it as it really is? We are spiritual beings experiencing a spiritual life. And I kind of like that. It gives you something to think of. But however you want to look at this, by virtue of you being here, you have a duty and obligation to live up to the truth of who you are. I want to leave you with a quotation from Dr. Ernest Holmes, our founder. He says this: every living soul spends its entire time trying to discover what God made him to be. The great search is ended when we find that what we are looking for is what we are looking with. See, it's the same idea of stepping into the image. We create it by the way we see. And that song